Well, I'd like to welcome you all to the special meeting of the Kennett Township Planning Commission. I'm impressed. This is quite a turnout. Anyway, we're here tonight to discuss our planning process. We're doing an updated comprehensive plan. The last comprehensive plan, I believe, was 2004, and we're usually mandated to do it every 10 years. Comprehensive plan is sort of the strategic plan for the township. It is a guide, and it sets future policy decisions for the township. So it's in itself is not an ordinance, but it paves the way for changes and moving forward with the ordinances in the future. It establishes a foundation and a rationale for the changes in township ordinances and in zoning districts. It's also a legal document. It's mandated by the municipality's planning code, and as such, it supports township ordinances. So it is very important. The comprehensive plan is not the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance is what controls parcels in the township, tells you what zoning district you're in. It is not that. What it is, it looks ahead to changes in the zoning ordinance. So it's important in that regard. Okay. We have 3 maps that we've put around, and hopefully our IT people have got this all figured out. We have the existing land use map, which is
right here.
into it? Okay. Basically, with the existing land use map, is it shows parcel by parcel throughout the township the current use of that parcel, the best that we could ascertain through the tax records from the assessment office. So and there's a key onto the map, and we'll leave these up after our meeting tonight if you want to take a closer look at them.
And our time frame was February 2014. Because we had to cut the time frame off at some point. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Since land uses keep changing. So just so you know, there might be something slightly different that's on the ground right now, but that was our cutoff point.
Okay. And this is Janine Spears, who's acted as our consultant for Chester County Planning Commission, who has helped us. We'll take questions at the
Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
so.
thank you.
Okay, so you're from Chester County Planning. You've acted as our consultant for it. So we have caught mistakes in it before, so one of the things we'd like for you guys to do is take a look at it and see if you find any mistakes in it as well. We have the zoning district map, which is, back to that. That's the current zoning in the township. That tells you, you look at your parcel and you find out what you're currently zoned. And that zoning district controls the uses that in your area. And then finally, and what for tonight is probably the most important map, is the future land use map, which I think is on the big screen over there. And this is the map that, in a broad brush sense, shows the future of the township, where growth might occur, might not occur, and how we will control development in the future. So once again, it's a very important map and one that deserves your attention. Why are we here tonight? We have not completed the comprehensive plan. I want to make that very, very clear. We still have some more work to do on it. We have to do a fair share analysis, which is looking at some of the legal problems that might occur in the future if someone were to challenge our zoning. But we need to get a good sense of the future land use map in order to continue on. And we want to keep our community involved, because this is your map. I mean, this is as I keep saying, this is important. We need your input. We need your concerns, and we want to provide this as a forum, so as to make any corrections or change directions, so that we don't get too far out in front of the general public. So tonight we will focus on basically on the future land use map. There are various categories on the future land use map, and I thought I'd just read this sort of bullet section here within the text. It's chapter 7 of the draft for the comprehensive plan. And what it says is future land use categories were developed based on relevant issues that emerge during the comprehensive plan update process. The following outline these primary considerations. So basically what we've done is you'll look at the key, and there are different uses, which I'm going to have each of the planning commission members explain one of them to you. And this is how we came up with the designations that we have so far. Number 1 is location and extent of environmental constraints. 2 is existing land use patterns. 3 is location and functioning of local and regional transportation network. 4 is location of existing and proposed community facilities and services. 5 is location and types of businesses, industries, and economic need for these uses. 6, accommodating housing for estimated population growth and addressing fair share housing needs. Or not just 7. Implementing township policy goals and objectives for land use and related topics. And finally, consistency with the Kennett Area Regional Planning Commission Comprehensive Plan and the Chester County Policy Plan Landscapes 2. Kennett Township participates in a regional group. We're one of, I believe, 5 municipalities that work together. They include Copson, Pennsbury, Kennett, New Garden, and the borough of Kennett Square. And of course, the county has their own landscapes plan, so we try to be consistent with all the plans that are on record. So with that, I'd like to introduce each of our planning commission members as they make their presentation, and we will start with Wendy Cooper, who's going to talk about the rural conservation and the rural residential uses.
Which are basically lumped under rural resources. I want to address just 4 points and try to be fairly concise, stating what are these resources, why should the township preserve them, how is this accomplished, and how are we doing so far? The resources essentially, as you might imagine, are in large part natural ones, like Class 1 woodlands, agricultural lands, PINDY sites, wetlands, steep slopes. Also included are rural residential areas, that is 4 acres or more, or over 10 acres for homesteads or farms. Of course, rural vistas, cultural resources like Longwood Gardens, we include in this open space rural resource. Even Union Hill Cemetery, a little passive, but Anson Nixon Park, more active, and various baseball fields. We conserve and preserve these first because over decades many of us have moved here because of this rural nature of the township, the character as you drive along the roads. But I think even more importantly is the fact that these resources benefit all of us as residents in many, many different ways, including health benefits for both active exercise like ball games and running, and walking in the open fields and around the trails, in the woodland spaces, in parks, and even in your residential open spaces with your dedicated open spaces in certain residential communities, as well as some of the significant lands that have been permanently preserved by the Land Conservancy for Southern Chester County. The conservation of these valued rural resources is accomplished in a number of ways. First of all, basically through zoning, like agricultural zoning, rural residential, R4, farmsteads, homesteads, as I mentioned, 10 acres above, and residential developments that are open space developments that have eased or dedicated open spaces. And as I already mentioned, the Land Conservancy. And there are other eased parcels here and there that might be held or eased under the Brandywine Conservancy or with other kinds of easements. How are we doing so far? I just pulled out a quote on page 7.2 of this chapter 7. that states, while development, growth, and change have been ongoing in Kennett Township since the 1970s, and I think we've all seen that enormously, township growth management policies have markedly helped Kennett Township maintain its rural open character into 2014. And if you just look at, and many of you don't have this, but of course it's on the Township website, on page 7.2 there is a snapshot, a table here listing all these different categories of land use. And just totaling up, I did this just recently, and I was amazed that well over 50% of our 9,491 acres fall within these categories that I've mentioned of rural resources. And over 16% is in land available either for all township residents, like the Land Conservancy, lands, the State Line Woods, for instance, off of Marybelle Lane, or for those whose developments have dedicated open spaces where they can walk on trails. So essentially, it looks like we're doing pretty well so far, but we still can do more permanently preserved lands for the benefit of all of us.
Thank you, Wendy. And let's move on to David Shepard, who will speak of cultural conservation.
Just one quick question. Are you the author of Chapter 4 then?
No.
I thought Chapter 4 was the...
Well, let's get through our presentation.
I just want to know
We'll get into
what
the
part of
discussion.
this plan she wrote.
Not in us, none of the members of the Planning Commission individually write this. It's basically worked on together along with Janine from the Planning Commission. That's the
Okay.
Planning Commission.
Thank you, Jim. Cultural conservation is a class of land use that in a very broad and general sense consists of relatively large spaces which are available for a number of forms of public use and enjoyment. The total land that we have in this category is 655 acres. This class includes three specific areas of the township. The first is the Anson-Nixon Park. The second is the cemeteries along North Union Street. And the third is Longwood Gardens. I'd like to consider each of these separately, individually. Let's begin with Anson-Nixon Park. It has a total of 82 acres. 65 acres are in the township. And the park provides for active and passive recreation. It's also a venue for entertainment. The park is administered and financed jointly by the township and the borough through the Kennett Area Park Authority. Our recommendations for the park are, since things seem to be going well and there are no problems we're aware of, that the township continue to support the Kennett Area Park Authority. Now let's look at cemeteries. These cemeteries provide open space, and they also provide a history of the township and the area literally written in stone. The location of the cemeteries, see if I can do this without blinding anyone, are on North Union Street, on that side of the street, and then on the other side of the street there. So, our recommendations for the cemeteries, and this may be not for everyone, and this has nothing to do with Halloween, but we want to consider exploring with the cemetery custodians use of walkways for passive recreation and as a way for people to connect with the past of the township. Then the last and most significant area perhaps is Longwood Gardens. Longwood Gardens is a unique world-class venue which provides for recreation, horticultural displays, commercial entertainment, and other activities. The Gardens is a independent nonprofit organization, and it's located in the north part of the township. There, there's a star in Longwood Gardens. That means it's a special study area. The reasons it's a special study area is there currently is a joint effort among the three affected townships, because Longwood Gardens is in Kennett Township, it's in East Marlborough Township, and it's in Pender Township. So the three townships, working with the Chester County Planning Commission, are attempting to come up with some appropriate zoning for Longwood Gardens. I can't see the zoning map over there, but I will tell you that in Kennett Township, the zoning for Longwood Gardens is residential R2, which is really not appropriate for what goes on out there. So our recommendations with respect to Longwood Gardens are, first, to continue to work with the neighboring townships to develop appropriate zoning for Longwood Gardens. Second is to work with Longwood to mitigate traffic problems and the impact that the gardens may have on neighboring property. And third, we want to encourage Longwood Gardens to continue the adaptive reuse of the many historic structures that exist at Longwood. Overall, for this cultural conservation classification, we want to ensure the continued viability and availability of these resources to the community.
Thank you, David. And Jim Shevlotowski, you're speaking to suburban residential and high-density residential.
Right. On the map, suburban residential is SR and high-density residential is HDR. Suburban residential and high-density residential basically would be where the bulk of us live. Suburban residential is characterized by medium-density single-family houses, what most of us would just call your typical suburban development. And as I mentioned, the SR is the suburban residential. Now, if you were to look on the current zoning map, these are principally in the R1, R2, and R3 zoning districts. Now, the high-density residential, HDR, on the new map would reflect a higher density development pattern. And typically, in high-density residential, you're going to see a mix of multifamily residences such as townhomes, apartments. Single-family homes may also be included. Examples of existing high-density residential would be Victoria Gardens, Kendall at Longwood, Balmoral. On the current zoning map, you would see these as R4 or PRD, Planned Residential Development. Now, in the comp plan in Chapter 7, there's a table that Wendy was referring to earlier. In 2002, residential use was approximately 40% of the total township acreage. That was about 3,700, let's just say 3,800 acres out of the township were residential uses. In 2014, in February, that increased to 47% was residential use, about 4,500 acres. Now, when you look at the future land use map, the suburban residential development, SR, are usually not close enough to infrastructure for water, for sewage, and these will continue to be largely on-site sewage and on-site water. And those become almost self-governing principles. On the other hand, high-density residential are largely placed close to the borough. And that's principally because the borough has the available sewage capacity and the infrastructure exists, infrastructure including water, sewage as mentioned, and the roadways. water line and connections to transportation are also very important. And when you look at the future land use map, you would probably find a very good correlation between the current zoning versus what the future land use would depict.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And we'll move to Rudy Garza, who is going to speak to us on a new category we've added called mixed use.
Mixed use. Mixed use is in essence what it sounds like. It's a combination of commercial, residential, business, light industrial, institutional, a combination of different allowances, so forth, to grow the economic development in the township, but also to provide some opportunities to correct some of the areas like Ways Lane. If you're familiar, as you're leaving Kennett Borough, Ways Lane is a part of Kennett Township that we have been looking at for a number of years. Also on the west side of the borough, if you're going into the borough on Cypress Street, you'll notice Magnolia Place. We are right across the street from Magnolia Place. So this mixed use gives us an opportunity to provide some possibilities. A business on the first floor, restaurant, a business of some sort with residences, apartments on the second floor, third floor, a combination of different types of businesses, different types of opportunities to develop some of the areas that are closest to the borough and areas that will not only provide economic development for Kennett Township, but also provide some opportunities for people to come into the borough and into the township and work with them. So mixed use is exactly that. We're talking mainly about the sections around the borough, cooperating with the Kennett Square Borough and also with New Garden Township to make sure that we develop those areas in a proper fashion.
Okay, thank you, Rudy. And we'll move to Bob Listerman, who will talk to us about the commercial office campus category.
Okay. Give you an idea what we're talking about is this area here and possibly down into here. I say possibly down here because this is under study. This is Ways Lane. So some of you are familiar with Ways Lane. To put things in perspective, we're talking about 2% of our land use here. And what's already been in place is what you're familiar with would be the Exelon buildings, as well as the Fairfield Inn and all that back in there, along with what could be considered across the street, meaning the office park that you see off of McFarland. That kind of is in the greater terminology called Ways Lane area. And what we're trying to do in this area is to continue with the office park concept. There is already approved buildings that have not been acted upon in those areas. You'll see the retail signs that indicate that being available. And the idea is to keep that development, kind of like with the residential, where there's going to be a lot of need for water and sewer up in that area. So primarily, keeping Kennett Township rural and rural looking has always been part of our objectives. And by putting commercial demand in an area that makes sense, allows us to avoid any legal action by developers for not providing that. So we are under obligation as a township to provide for these uses. And that's why we have designated those areas. It's also in conjunction with, there's a Route 1 corridor initiative that's being done by the Chester County Economic Development people. And what they're trying to do all up and down the Route 1 corridor, which is basically defined in loose terms between the railroad tracks and the Route 1 bypass. That's an area that we are going literally municipality to municipality, not to tell them what to do, find out what they want to do, and inventory it so that we can act as a collective voice when a developer were to come into that area and want to do something. We can help guide them to where the municipality is looking for that type of development. These are called tax rateable developments, meaning they're a tax plus effect on the community. Low impact on schools, higher property taxes, and if in place, higher local income taxes. So the objective is to help keep your taxes down by having these tax rateable opportunities come our way. Our main goal is to avoid a hodgepodge type development that some of you might have been around here long enough to know how Route 202 was developed. The people in Chester County would like to have a little better, it's not the word is not control, but more facilitate a better outcome. And that's what the Route 1 corridor group is doing.
Thank you, Bob. And Janine from Chester County is going to speak to us on specialized ag and industry.
Specialized ag and industry is this purpley gray area, largely around the borough, here and here, and then also around the train tracks and Hillendale. And it focuses primarily on areas that are currently industrial and also currently have mushroom farming in place. Just like the commercial uses in Kennett Township, the Planning Commission felt it important to continue to have a significant amount of land, which amounts to not as significant as the total amount of the township land, but significant for the category, 6.6% in specialized ag and industrial, and this helps your tax base. It helps broaden your tax base. As Bob said, it brings ratables to the township to help lower taxes for residents, and it also provides employment opportunities for residents in the township. You notice here there is a star at the intersection where the AI meets some of the other districts, and that is the special study area, and the township, that's continued over from the current comp plan, as well as it's important to note that you'll see the boundaries of the future land use categories in some places are relatively similar to your current comprehensive plan. The special study area was named in your current comprehensive plan. There's still transportation issues there. Traffic is increasing south of the borough into Kennett. I'm going into New Garden, going into Delaware. So the Planning Commission felt that it was important to potentially have a future study of that area, both looking at land use in that area and looking at traffic issues in that area and determining how both coincide with one another.
Okay, thank you, Janine. We had Village. John Hager was going to do that, but he could not be with us tonight. He's at another meeting, I think, with the Byway Commission, so he's actually working in the township tonight. But Jim, I think you were going to pick up the ball for him?
We'll go ahead. There are two villages in Kennett Township. They're on the east side, Mendenhall and Hamilton. They would be depicted with a V. You're basically referring to 200 acres total within the township. And the village of Mendenhall and Hamilton would be characterized basically as sort of a junior version of the mixed use that Rudy was referring to. You have residential and commercial. If you think of the Mendenhall Inn, some of the stores that used to be there, both historically as well as what might be trying to get there now. The village would be represented by perhaps smaller lots. You may see setbacks that are narrower, and it reflects more of that traditional way that the village had evolved, and we're trying to keep that look and feel of the village in those two areas. The big challenge that we have right now, as you would all well know, is basically traffic. One of the items that makes a village is the ability to walk and have that connection. The reality of the situation is 52 and Route 1 sort of nix that real quick. And we could sit here all day and talk about planning, but at the end of the day, a key partner in that process is PennDOT. And of course, then you get into a whole different issue with that. But that's going to be the challenge. The second challenge that we have in the village, well, actually in both villages, is basically sewage. And the ability to, because there's not really room for on-site sewage. You may need to have community sewage systems, or you're going to have to develop an infrastructure that supports that. So basically, your traffic, Route 52, Route 1, and the sewage are the two major challenges. The other aspect that's happening right now is you see signs along 52 for what would be called the Route 52 Bikeway, or the Kennett Bikeway, and that's part of trying to establish that pedestrian/bike connection. But again, we always have that operative word, traffic, and the vehicle count, which is always a big concern. And as I said, that is basically 2% of the township, 200 acres. So the big challenge right now is going to be the traffic and the sewage.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And Marla Palmer is going to speak on special studies. Some people already stole your thunder.
Right. Thank you.
Sorry. That was gonna work. Good luck.
Thank you.
Hopefully it has no juice in it.
Okay, thank you. So we've identified 6 areas as special study areas, and we've already had heard a little bit about each of these areas. So the first one is,
It's not working, is it?
not working. Okay, so,
Where the stars are.
Where the stars are, all the stars.
oh, thank you. Okay,
Good.
great. So first one over here, Sam's Lane. Second one over here, Ways Lane. 5 points at the intersection of Kalin, Hillendale, and Old Kennett Pike. And then up here, Longwood Gardens. And Hammerton, thank you, and Mendenhall down here. So these six areas have been identified as special studies areas because of the unique attributes of each of these areas, and our acknowledgement that special zoning provisions and new zoning districts could eventually evolve based on land uses in each of these areas. The special study districts are starting to be discussed on page 7-8 of the chapter at issue here. First one, Longwood Gardens. Dave Shepard already touched on that. Some of the things that we are looking at, continuing to study with respect to this area, are appropriate land uses, setbacks, impacts on surrounding areas, traffic circulation concerns, and community facility planning, and keeping in mind that Longwood Gardens continues to provide sewage to Hamilton Village, as historically portions of the village north of Route 1 were built by Longwood as now former employee housing. And moving along to page 711, we discuss Hamilton and Mendenhall villages, again here and here. At issue there is the traffic issues, pedestrian circulation, and the extension of the Kennett Bikeway along Route 1 in Hamilton. In Mendenhall, appropriate new uses in the village and pedestrian circulation. We're considering, as well as amenities that could enhance the bikeway along Route 52. And also on-lot sewer concerns need to be further examined in that area. And then moving on to Ways Lane and Sam's Lane. Ways Lane, Sam's Lane. These areas are interesting and important in terms of redevelopment options. And studies should be coordinated with Kennett Square Borough to achieve comparability between the two municipalities in terms of land use planning and regulations. Traffic circulation, both pedestrian and vehicular, is a big issue in these areas, particularly as the land uses change in those areas as they become developed. And sewer and water facilities are critical in those areas. And the final one, 5 points, right down here again at the intersection of Old Kennett Pike, Calvin, and Hillendale. Right now there's a considerable amount of mushroom industry in that area. If this ever changes, it'll be a challenging area in terms of mixed uses, and how the area affects and serves the local region should be considered. Circulation issues will be considered along with further study as the intersection experiences travel issues and increasing traffic volumes.
Thank you, Marlon. Okay, so I think what we want to do is spend the balance of the meeting with your questions and comments.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, we were R2, and you changed this to agriculture. Why?
Well, first, let's get your name. I believe you're Eugene
Yeah, I got
Coggins.
Eugene Coggins.
Yes.
And I'm, that green up in the corner there, that's our property.
Yeah, I am familiar with it. Actually, Lisa gave me a heads up about that, that you had called and had some inquiry. Could I have my name for the audience? Actually talking about Mr. Coggins' property here, which is a little over 100 acres. And it is zoned R2.
Right.
And I believe in the last comprehensive plan, it was probably in a sort of a rural type area. And this is not zoning. I think this is an area that we're going to make note of and take a second look at it, because it is not part of Longwood Gardens. And I think we need to take a look at it.
Why did you change it from one to the other? That's all I'm asking. You changed from R2 to agriculture.
No, we're not changing zoning.
Well, it's a different, it says agriculture now, not R2. And what gives you the right to do that? Because you're confiscating the value of the land is what I'm trying to get from this.
The zoning's not changed.
The zoning is changed.
What you're proposing.
Actually, it's under cultural conservation. It's not agriculture at all.
Well,
But he's-
why do you call it
Yeah.
agriculture?
That's why he's asking. It shows that it's agricultural. It shows it's cultural conservation.
Just leave it as R2 then, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Changing it to cultural conservation.
You just leave it as R2, the way it was.
No, but what I think what he means is, instead of designating it on the future land use map as in the same category as Longwood, that would be designated under a resource conservation section such as you had, as to be more compatible with the zoning that it is. I think that's your
No,
argument.
all I'm asking, just leave it the way it was, R2. I mean, I don't understand why you changed it to agriculture.
Yeah, once again, we're not changing the zoning.
Well, what it says.
But I see your point.
Jim, I've been talking to a lot of these people. You might want to discuss the difference between land planning and zoning.
Yeah. Proposing. It hasn't been changed, they're proposing it.
You're confiscating the value of the land is what I'm trying to get at. I don't think I have a right to do that.
Do you want to do, or do you want me to?
Let's record it, Jim. You know, many of the questions and comments are going to be recorded and be evaluated, so we're not necessarily going to be able to resolve every question or every issue.
No, but I think his point is good, that we want to explain the difference,
Answer the
which I tried to do at the outset, but it doesn't.
If you look at the
try to do it
maps,
again.
it clearly says it's currently R2, and on your proposal, it says CC.
Yeah, but you see,
So,
the point is, they're two different products.
Right.
well, exactly, but you're proposing a change.
No. We're not proposing a change to the zoning, but the way the map shows it, we're proposing a change in the use, which could lead to a change in the zoning.
Make sure that's very good.
You so confused us too.
It isn't part of our... It's been recorded.
It's been recorded.
See, all I want is just leave it as R2, and I'll make you happy.
I think we will.
Money back to market.
Now, let's get,
So you'll leave it as R2 then? Am I right? You're going to leave it as R2?
there are no plans to change it from R2, it would stay R2.
Okay, because it said at the bottom agriculture. Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My name is Bob Elder, and I live... My name is, can you hear that out there? My name is Bob Elder, and my wife and I live at 111 West Hillendale Road. For those of you who don't know exactly where that is, it's immediate adjacent to the cornfield, the 6 acres, part of the 26 acres that Jim owns. I live right next to the cornfield. And I moved there almost 20 years ago. And I remember asking Jim when I bought the house from him, what's going to happen to the cornfield? And I was taken by his answer. He said, well, that's a question for many years from now when I retire. That is my retirement. But in the meantime, I belong to the Planning Commission, and part of my job is to preserve the beauty and the antiquity and the solemnity and the loveliness of Hillendale Road. Don't worry. So I bought the house. And after I bought the house, Jim moved out of his house and built a house directly behind his house, as far back off the road as you can get, right up in the woods. And I said, Jim, why are you building the house way back in the woods where nobody can see it? The answer was very interesting. He said 2 reasons. I don't like to be close to my neighbors, and I don't want to see the light of their house at nighttime. Really. So we bought the house, and my wife and I enjoy this house. And the thing that we enjoy about it is that we can sit on our deck in the back, and we can look to the left at the cornfield and watch the bluebirds out there. I have 12 bluebird houses. The bluebirds flit across the tassels on top of the corn, and they eat the buds. And I can see all these bluebirds. And I can see the deer, 1 dozen, 2 dozen deer that come out. As a matter of fact, a summer ago, a little fawn came out from the corn rows, 5-day-old fawn, and started playing with a rabbit. It was like Bambi and Thumper. And my wife and I call this place God's Half Acres. Some of you as old as I remember there was a movie called God's Half Acre. And in the wintertime we watch the geese alight on the cut fields. We have indigo buntings that come to us. Anybody seen indigo buntings? We have indigo buntings. We've had Baltimore Orioles. We love to watch from 100 feet high the plummeting of an owl come down and eat the snakes and the rodents that live in the corn. And that's our God's Half Acre. That's what we came here to see, and we were hoping that that would be preserved. And now that's about change. That's about change. We're going to have 90 acres is going to be consumed in a high-density reconstruction, and all of God's Half Acre is going to turn into bricks and sticks. So the birds will be gone, the deer will be gone, the owl will be gone, all the wildlife will be gone, and we now cannot see the sunrise and the sunset without raising our gaze, because there is likely to be a 50-foot pile of bricks next to us, which, if you know some of the people involved in this, you can picture it, because that pile of bricks is the same as exists at the corner of State Street up in town, where they're building a high-rise across from the car wash. It's an abomination. It looks like a Conshohocken textile mill, and that's what we're likely to get in our God's Half Acre. Well, Jim, that's your legacy to us, and for when you retire and go to, I know where you said you'd like to retire, down to the Maryland coast, down to the Maryland Eastern Shore, and the legacy you will leave us is the destruction of God's Half Acre and bricks and sticks. And we regard that as a betrayal of your initial, original feelings and ideals about our town, and particularly Hillendale Road. Think of that word, Hillendale, 6 miles of hill and dale and hill and dale and hill and dale, lined all the way from end to end by open fields and farms and little single families. That little house that I bought from you, I have adored, and for any of you who have driven on that road and take a look at that house, you will probably agree that it's probably one of the loveliest houses on the entire road. It is beautiful. And we did that to that house out of respect for what we feel about the loveliness of Kennett Square, of Kennett Township. So when you go down to your retirement in someplace dark and remote in Maryland, and you think about back here and what's going on, please know that every time we look at that pile of bricks and sticks, we'll be thinking about you, Jim. So enjoy your retirement.
I have to ask something. Where in the world did you get that idea? no plans. I have not talked to anyone, no real estate agent, no developer. Nothing has changed since you bought your house. Where are you getting the idea that we're getting a bunch of houses?
Because on your map you have HDR. Yeah, why is the zoning changing then?
We don't want the zone to change, don't you understand
The
that?
zone is, there's no change.
There is a change.
Right there it is. Hold on for a second. On that map, on that screen, it does say high-density residential.
Yes.
HDR.
Yes.
And if you recall, when I was presenting, I said in the current zoning map, high-density residential is also listed as either PRD or R4. When you look at the existing zoning map, that area that you're now talking about happens to be labeled as R4. The R is for the zoning district. The HDR was representing the future land use map. So, admittedly...
On the end around again.
No, they're not split hairs.
It is because you have a conflict of interest.
R4 is HDR.
It already is high density.
It's already...
No, it's not.
No, it's not. It's R4. Leave it R4.
It's not.
Leave it R4. Just leave it where it is.
It is.
It is not.
On the Kennett Township...
Get in your car and go down there and look, because you have never driven down Hillendale Road if you say
The
that.
zoning map is R4,
Yeah, I understand that.
and that is what the zoning allows.
I understand what the zoning
Future
allows.
land
but
use
you're-
is HDR.
Yes, and
That's
in
all
your
we're
chapter
saying.
8, you have this thing listed as 8 to 15 dwelling units per acre with 50-foot buildings.
That's right. That's what
Not-
you have
not-
listed.
Not in our future land use.
Absolutely. Here, would you like to show, I'll show you chapter 8.
You should read it.
Go bring up chapter 8 on your computer. Go take a look at it. I'll give you the page number.
Excuse me, excuse me,
The comp plan has nothing to do with the zoning.
1
It
minute.
does not specify the zoning.
Okay. If we're going to accomplish anything, and everybody's going to be heard, we need to do it one at a time. I will present the microphone to you when the chairman recognizes one person at a time. Okay? Everybody's just getting upset, and this is not going to accomplish anything.
Well,
Okay?
one question. I got one question.
To
Okay.
the chairman.
How many people are here from Hillendale and Meadowview Lane? And it's because of HDR.
We don't want the land use though.
We don't want that land used for the development that's planned in the housing description in Chapter 8.
Can I ask a question of those people who are here?
Yes,
Do
please.
you accept the zoning as it currently is, R4, and as it has been since, since...
Yeah, but the zoning doesn't talk about land use.
You didn't answer my question. I asked a question. Do you all accept and recognize that the zoning there has been and is currently R4?
Yeah, we understand that.
And what is the definition of R4?
R4 is residential, what is it?
Height limitation,
Water,
number
With
of...
on-site on-site water and septic. The minimum lot area is 1 acre.
That's right. So you're talking about changing it from I-15 units.
we're not talking about changing the zoning. We're discussing...
that, but how...
Let me finish.
We're just...
We need to stay one at a time if we're going to get something done.
But let me finish the explanation. Public water and public sewer, it goes down to half acre.
You need to be heard.
How Meadowview Lane was developed. Meadowview Lane was developed under R4. Once again, I have no plans. I would not support changing it from R4, personally. And I have no plans to go into Maryland. I don't know where that comes from. It's not happening. I've lived in this place for 63 years and I'm not leaving. Thank you. Sorry, now I'll take some questions. Well, let's go to you. You have not asked the question yet.
My name's John Halberstadt, and I live in Falcons Lair. And it seems to me, underlying the whole problem that is getting expressed here is the relationship between the zoning and these land use plans. when you put forward a future land use plan, that implies to many of us here, at least I don't speak for myself, it certainly implies to me, that as people look into the future, the zoning commission, whoever they are, people thinking about what should be done with what areas of the township, they would be looking at this plan and saying, well, this is how we think it should be laid out. And so when you look at the definitions you have incorporated into this land use plan, okay, in the future, you have enabled, in essence, an interpretation for high-density residential in an area which I, and probably a whole bunch from people who put their hands up, think that's not the appropriate future designation. Now, you can say that the R4 zoning falls under that in some way, but when you look at R4 zoning, that's really a very limited end of the HDR concept. And so to me, you've got to revise your future planning nomenclature to make some distinctions that are more appropriate for this HDR. As it stands today, I mean, it is very concerning, frightening, disturbing to see an HDR put on that block at near 5 points.
I just want to thank you for your very concise and straightforward comments. Thank you for that clarification.
Hi, my name's Steve Grabowski. I live at 115 Meadowview Lane. I'd just like to know who asked the committee to change the characterization of that property from R4 to HDR? Or did the committee themselves decide to make that change on that map that you present to us right there?
In the last comprehensive plan, and in the comprehensive plan before that, for the last 20 years, the designation has always been high-density residential. It has not been changed in this particular comprehensive plan. The zoning R4 started in 1985 and has remained zoned R4 from 1985 to present time. Before 1985, there was a zoning ordinance in Kennett Township which was enacted in 1959, and that was the first zoning ordinance in Kennett Township. And at that point, that was the most dense district. It was called RB, which had a minimum lot size of 3/4 of an acre. There have been no changes in the last 3 or 4 comprehensive plans with the designation, and there has been no changes in zoning. And
How does that high density
That's the problem. I think this is
get
what this gentleman
placed
was
on that
referring
map?
to. There's a confusion between what is being said, and I think this is something we need to take to heart. What is being said in the comprehensive plan, and what is the reality of zoning districts? Ma'am.
My name is Adrienne Planoff, and I live in Falcons Lair, and I guess I had a concern hearing someone say that these HDR areas were put in a section where there's infrastructure, and I did. Oh, Adrienne Planoff, I live in Falcons Lair. The infrastructure by the HDR designation on Hillendale, I just don't see how you could say that that road could support high density. If any of you have high school children trying to get to the high school, I've had 3, have one there now. The traffic at that intersection between 7 and 8 o'clock is terrible and almost unsafe. So I don't see how you could put high-density units on that section of road. You know, with a lot of other issues too, but I think traffic would be one of the reasons why that's just not the right spot for it.
Thank you. We go to this. We'll work our way over.
My name is Emily Spadafora. I've lived here since August. My address is 204 South Fairville Road, and I'm going to bring up high density again. The problem with changing the future use, I understand about zoning, and the plan. We went through this in my last community, which is kind of why we moved. because the zoning commission used the comprehensive plan to change zoning. It's a reality. It can be a reality. My problem with high-density change here is with the Balmoral property. There are woods, that little section that comes down there at the bottom is open woods. Woodland. And according to that, according to my experience, that leaves the door open for developers to continue Balmoral into those woods. And, I've heard before, oh, well, that couldn't happen.
No, it's part of the Balmoral development, and it's restricted, it's deep restricted open space.
Right.
But
Before, it was, you had it, your last comprehensive plan had it as open space residential. Now it's zoned, or not zoned, but you have it listed as high-density residential. The whole thing, including that little part that's the woods. So, to my eyes and my experience, that's very scary.
When we make
Opens the door for litigation.
We will.
Exactly. So.
Can we move on to go around the room?
Hi, I'm Steve Dargis. I live in Penns Manor. I'm not sure if you're the right people to be complaining to about this, but do you have jurisdiction over the borough changes?
No.
No? Okay.
Never mind. Okay. Hi, I'm David Lewis. I'm probably the reason that your room's packed. One of the things that may help people is in the definition of R4, it says they can be single-family homes, they can be multi-family homes, they can be quadplexes, and then with further either board or supervisor permissions, they can go to some, more high-density residential areas, right, like apartments. So in the housing section right now, it says there's the density that was just changed in the May revision was to 8 to 15 units per acre. It also was a change in the May revision to Chapter 8 that says it's now going to be 50-foot buildings.
May revision in the comprehensive plan.
In the comprehensive plan, Chapter 8, in the grade areas, is where people are getting their information from because I passed it around, okay? Because we needed a definition of what high-density residential was, and that's where we found it, not in Chapter 7. So, when we start taking a look at this, we start taking a look at that particular area south of the borough, I'd like to at least understand how we're going to resolve not only traffic problems, sewerage problems, water problems. I mean, the list goes on for that land because it's just not developed. It's majority woods and farmland, right? I mean, would you own 26.6 acres, I think, is the magic number, plus your own home.
But that's all right.
Huh?
It's a little more, but that's all right.
Well, that's because you got the other two properties too, I think. Yes, I'm aware of those too. So I guess let's just ask a flat-out question. Are you going to develop that land? Is that the reason this is getting planned this way?
No. I mean, it's not being planned this way because well, I have no plans for development. Okay? I mean, I'm not going to say it would be dishonest for me to sit up here and say I would never develop the land as a property, because you never know what your circumstances might be in the future. And as Mr. Elder said, yes, I've always sort of looked on it as, a pension fund. But I have no plans. I have not, as I said, I have not talked to any developer. I have owned this land for 25 years. And I was born here. I mean, it's like, it means something to me as well. I mean, it's home.
Well, I think that's the problem that we're all having, and the
Yeah.
reason that we all showed up is the designation.
I
of this-
appreciate that, if I were a neighbor, and I am, I would be concerned too. That's why I got involved in this, so many years ago, because
So how do
I
we...
feel strongly about the township.
How do we interact with you on a regular basis that we can make changes to Chapter 8 that starts describing the housing? Because I know you guys have another problem, right? There is all kinds of push for high-density residential or affordable housing and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So you guys almost have the impossible task of the year. Preserve all the agricultural land, preserve all the wooded lands, and, oh, by the way, meet all the affordable housing constraints.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I understand that particular problem, but I guess, how do we work with you on a regular basis so that we can have a little bit more input than this kind of meeting, right? I mean, I think we need working sessions. I think we need, other involvement from committees that can be formed out of the different areas that are going to be impacted by high-density residential. So I guess I'm going to ask, will you support that type of working sessions?
Anything that, for me personally, I'm one of 9, but, anything that, gets transparency, you know how surprised I was when I heard somebody say yesterday, oh, you're building 900 apartments? I go, what?
Well, that's what the numbers work out to.
I'm sorry, but it's like, what?
Well, you take your property, you take the Raimundo's, you take what Plankington has, and you take the PIA development, and you go do the math, and that's what you'll come up with.
Yeah, well,
right?
As long as I live there.
Well, one last question, and I'll give it
Yeah, but I want to respond to one other thing you said. The change in density and the change in building height has resulted from conversations that we've had with a proposal to change the zoning east of the borough to do apartment houses on a tract that overlooks Nixon Park. And we've had exploratory meetings with a developer coming in who wants that sort of density and wants that sort of height. So in a sense, this is a way to float that idea before the public. But that's sort of how that changed.
Yeah, but that got tagged as high-density residential, which affects us south of the borough also.
Yeah.
So we need to at least separate that.
Yeah.
Some of the other townships have HDR1, HDR2, and they're coming up with slightly different definitions for each of those areas for density. Also, your 8 to 15 exceeds any of the surrounding township densities.
The 8, to be perfectly frank, is what's in the ordinance now for apartments. That's the maximum density. The proposal for the Miller's Hill was 12, 15.
It's at 15 right now.
No, I meant from the specific developer. So, yeah, that's where that came from. Yeah, anything we can do to interact and work together.
So
I have no problem with that.
I'm sure I can get input from people.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick question?
Well, wait, we're going around the room, so I want to be fair.
Well, it has to do with that specifically.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
If you're talking about that the Blevins tract, it falls up under this as mixed use.
Yes.
And not HDR. So,
What's the difference?
yeah. How's
Mixed
that-
use is high-density residential combined with commercial. So it's looking into the type of development that, like Magnolia Place, it's sort of the PIA property that's being developed in the borough and on the edge of the township, west of the borough, which has, I think they're having the Vickery Pub, and then they're having residential above it. So that's the distinction. There was some talk earlier about doing mixed use on this instead of high-density residential, but we really didn't think that this area could support that type of commercial and with the traffic. I mean, we've been thinking along these things. I go out and get my mail on that road every day. I know what the traffic's like. So that's basically the difference. Okay? Joel?
Yes.
Well, we have to-
Cheryl Petrona, 119 West Hillendale Road. So
I surround her.
So is this not the appropriate forum to suggest that we're proposing you to change it from HDR to either RC or RR?
It is definitely the forum to propose it, and
So
something that,
on record.
we can look at. The problem with that is that, because the fair share housing and legal issues that you have to provide for growth in an area, that you have to provide for the ability to have higher density in the future. So if you take it away from this area, the question becomes, where do you put it?
Can't we share with other townships?
Yes. At this point, no.
Why?
You have shared zoning. If you want to have shared zoning with Kennett Square Borough or New Garden, you would have to have joint zoning with them. So you wouldn't have individual township zoning.
So what are the numbers we need to reach? What are the required numbers for high density? And where do we
There is
stand?
not this is it's a very technical question, so Janine, I'll let you step in, but there are no hard numbers. We were challenged several years ago for being exclusionary, by a developer, also for the Miller's Hill tract, in which the developer said that we had not provided enough multifamily dwelling units in the township to meet our fair share, and that we didn't have vacant land that would allow the developer to come in to help meet that fair share. We prevailed in that challenge, and we won it. We did show that we did have fair share because we had some land that had not been developed. And we had provided for multifamily in other areas of the township. And this was before we did Penn's Manor, which is, I believe, 144 townhouses. So there's not a hard answer to that. It depends on what happens at the court when you go into, if you are challenged in court on your zoning. One of the things that's important is to remember is that Kennett Township, are we like 80 or 90% zoned either R1 or R2, which is a minimum of 4 acres or a minimum of 2 acres. So we're very, it would be easy to subject us to a legal challenge because we preserve so much of our land in Kennett Township. So it's something we have to keep in mind when we're doing the future land use map, when we're doing our comprehensive plan.
I'm sorry, could you just read, 80 to 90% of the township is zoned 2 acres or 4 acres? Is that what you just said?
Yes, I did. Am I right? Do we have? Yeah. If you look at our zoning map, which is, I can't see it as well as.
Right here, look at all the R1, R2.
Yeah, everything that's in yellow is practically zoned between 2 and 4 acres. We have been very proactive in preserving open space in
Okay,
Kennett
so
Township.
that's where like neighborhood like Falcons Lair, you have
Excuse me.
common areas.
Just one at a time, so we can have some order. You can ask the question at any time, but it's her question right now, okay? We need to get this meeting done.
Okay. We're all right.
So the only thing I'm suggesting is, I don't think that's the appropriate area to put high-density residential.
I understand that.
We should look at other areas.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Dwight Betzel. Name is Dwight Betzel, resident, Kennett Township, 32 years. On 2 adjacent properties, 311 and 307 Kennett Pike. One of the properties I see you have included in your special studies area at Mendenhall that is currently zoned R2. I would like to know, how do I find the details of the scope of this spatial study, number one. Number two, how do you plan to communicate the status of the study as it's ongoing and share the results of that study with the community?
Basically, it is a proposed study for the area. There are no specific studies planned at this time. We had that listed in the last comprehensive plan 10 years ago as also a special study area, along with Hamilton and Five Points, and we really did not have the time nor see the need at that point to pursue a special study there. We did do a special study between the last comprehensive plan and this one on Ways Lane, but they tend to be very detailed. So as far as I know, it's flagged, but there's no
ongoing study at this point, so it's proposed.
But if, however you know, it will come up at a planning commission meeting.
And the other aspect would be, we're trying to make more use of the township website. And so any type of planning commission initiative would be based on that website.
Yeah, watch for our agendas each month. We have both the normal public session and then we have our work sessions, and it's all public available. And this is a great turn. I'm glad whoever you did to get people out here, that's a good thing, because that's why we're here.
And if you could all sign up for our email
Definitely.
list, I send out mass emails about everything that's going on. So if you email me, I can add you to the list.
It's also available to self-add right off our website.
I can send you a master list.
They all want to be added.
It would be best to have each individual, because Frank, honestly, some people don't like to be enrolled by other people's distribution lists.
Well, any objections?
If not, we won't accept it.
See, I can do it just as well as you guys can.
Mr. Chairman, can I go over here, hers question in reference to something you said?
I'm Julie Tavareski, and I live in Falcons Lair. So when you say 80 to 90%, you're talking about, like in Falcons Lair, I don't know what the acreage is that's common. You're considering that as part of my 2 acres, because my home does not sit on close to 2 acres. But I'm zoned 2 acres.
No, actually, Falcons Lair is an interesting case. Falcons Lair, it was developed in 2 different zoning districts. The zoning district to the north of the woods was zoned in the old, it was either R4 or R3. It was on 1 acre lots. The area that was developed south of the woods is R1, which is a 4 acre zone. And at that time, you had a density bonus if you clustered developed. Instead of doing like a checkerboard of 4 acre lots over the whole parcel, to preserve open space, you could have a density of 1 unit for every 3 acres instead of 4 acres, and you clustered them. So if you look at your development south of the woods, you will see that there are 8, there are 8, there are 8, and there are 8. And the open space is,
So
goes
there's
along
50
with that.
acres of open space in there. So
Yeah.
In fact, the other concept is lot averaging. And so, for example, if it was 2 acre zoning, and let's assume you had 50 acres that could be built on, well, that would be 25 lots, but 25 2 acre lots. But under lot averaging, you would end up with 25 lots, perhaps of 1 acre each, with 25 acres of contiguous open space. So many of the developments in Kennett Township use that approach. So even though you're in a 2 acre zoning, you physically have 1 acre, and then in common ownership, you have the other acre somewhere else in your development. Now, it depends on the development.
And there was no open space on the area north of the woods.
Right, and I understand that, but I find it hard to believe living in, there's 52 homes, I believe, in there, all over an acre. So let's say there's 60 acres developed on. I don't believe there's another 50 acres in there of
open space.
There is, it's 52 acres of homes and 110 acre development.
Now, who's this?
I live in Falcons Lake.
Oh.
And I was on the homeowners association.
Okay. Okay, let's get Joe in the back.
It was about the density. She had another question.
I'll give her one more question, then we'll get to you, Joe, okay?
But I'm just curious what the high-density development up on McFarland Road, just above that little, between,
Yeah, that is, that also is in the R4 district, and that is an apartment complex. And yes, it has 112 units. On 17 or 20, you know this one, because this one.
Behind you. So I no longer have the sign.
Is that, I can't remember, is that, you need to qualify to live there?
Yes.
So does that count towards this high density that you're saying?
That doesn't count towards the density. What counted towards the density was the apartment. They didn't get a dispossessed, they didn't get extra because of, no.
It's not considered, it's not really considered.
Yes.
It's income restricted.
Yeah, but the point is, they didn't get a density bonus for it being, whether it's affordable housing or restricted or whatever. That is what was permitted for apartments at 8 acre. Okay, now.
Hi, I'm Robert Todd, president at 912 South Union. And I guess a comment about the special, I guess, what do you call them, the 5 Points intersection, special study. I guess it was proposed 10 years ago. It's still on the proposal. It seems like some of the decisions that are presented today are based on incomplete information if the 5 Point study has yet to be initiated.
Yeah, it is not a defined study. It's just an area. How do we say that? Because we recognize issues in those areas that it may merit a special study.
And it was not a high priority from the last comp plan. So because comp plans are a 10 to 20-year plan, not every single recommendation in a prior comp plan will be carried out or can be carried out within the time frame. And lower priority recommendations, because they are lower priority recommendations and there's only so much time and money, often in many municipalities aren't carried out. So because that was a very loose conceptual idea, and there still are traffic and other issues in that location, those issues haven't gone away, and they've probably been amplified actually since the last plan. The Planning Commission felt it was a good idea to still leave it as a loose conceptual idea and see if it rises to the level of being a higher priority in this comp plan through a process such as this.
Okay. Next, this young lady over here.
The one with the hand up. Thank you.
I've been here since 5 o'clock. I was on the range for 7 hours.
You were doing a great job. Hi, I'm Rosa Quintana, and I am one of the special study areas all the way at the top in the purple. And so what I'm hearing is that...
Hamilton?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, we have Hamilton.
Yes. Is that bad?
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing is that where I am, it's also a special study area, so I should keep an eye on the minutes and make sure that I come to the meeting that involves that special study area and that I don't miss that so that I have a say. And that the special study, I have no idea what it consists of other than issues that should be studied. And that as of right now, there really isn't anything for me to put my opinion to until we find out what this special study is and how I can voice my opinion then.
Okay.
Is that what we're...
Let me answer.
Okay.
You have two stars, two special study areas up near Hamilton.
Yeah.
The one with Longwood Gardens is currently being done. There is a special study that the county has sponsored, in which, as we talked earlier, the three municipalities, Pensbury, East Marlboro, and Kennett, are working together with Longwood Gardens to look at trying to do some more consistent zoning so that each municipality doesn't have its own fiefdom. Currently, it's zoned R2, which gets to Mr. Coggin's point. And the special study is looking at rezoning that so that it more closely manages, controls, and we have better expectations from what Longwood is going to do in the future. Longwood Gardens really isn't obviously a residential area, so it probably shouldn't be residential. There are support areas that are south of Route 1, and then there are more of the passive areas and sometimes proposed event spaces north of Route 1. So this is a proactive way to get ahead and manage and control and have consistency. The star for Hamilton itself, yes, there's nothing that's going on with that at the present time. And the reason it's there is basically because Hamilton is a historic village, and it has some issues because it's right on Route 1. I mean, it suffers from traffic noise. And are there ways that could enhance Hamilton? That's sort of one of the reasons why we put it on. Is there anything we can do to enhance Hamilton or enhance the experience of Hamilton to make it a better place for the residents? But we don't have any brilliant ideas on what to do with Route 1.
Thank you.
Okay. We had the lady behind, I think, next. Yes, yeah.
My name's Linda Green, and I'm on Fairville, right behind Balmoral. And between us is a woods. It's considered a mature beech woods. All of us along there understood, or I've been there 25 years. And I think before that time, the community got together and raised $60,000 in order to convince, maybe you're familiar with this, convince the developer of Balmoral that woods would remain.
Capra, wasn't it? Kennett and Pensbury Residents Association.
Probably. I wasn't there then. Anyway, you said that was restricted, right?
That was passed as a
zoning restricted.
Yeah, it was a planned residential development, and there are no places in the township in the future for any more planned residential developments. But yes, there was a court case in which Capra, a group of residents, Kennett Township, and the developer were all parties. And actually, if I remember correctly, it went to the supervisors, and there was a stipulation that there was originally talk of extending Walnut Road, is it?
Walnut Valley.
Walnut Valley Road into connecting with the road system. And the court settlement was that... It is?
It is. It has emergency access.
That's right.
It's not, you
It's not
can't
physically
drive
connected.
through, but if there's an emergency, you can go through.
Okay, that was part of the stipulation. But anyway, what it did was it preserved what was called the beech woods or the beech forest, because it was judged to be pretty important. There were a lot of large trees. So it was, I believe it was deed restricted and was part of that stipulation.
Good. And can you imagine anything in the next 50 to 100 years that you could overrule that or override it?
I wish I could, I'm going to be honest again, I wish I could say no. But then I look at some of the open space stuff that's happened, in cities. For instance, Chester, there was some areas that had open space, and it seems like everything is subject to litigation. But I think it's very unlikely. That's my personal opinion.
All right.
I think it's very unlikely. But, that's why I say, never say never on anything, because you never know what circumstances are going to come up. Who asked it? This gentleman. Let's go over on this side, because these guys have sort of been left out of the...
Underway, this gentleman.
I'm Martha Rishi. I live in Kintera.
Could we have some quiet, please?
Yeah, I'm Martha Rishi. I live in Kintera of East Annandale. I'm wondering, there's a big piece of land next to the Longwood Gardens that you're converting from R4 into HDR. That's a pretty large piece of land close to Longwood Gardens, which is supposed to be open space. What is the rationale for doing something like that?
Okay. Hate to say, everyone says good question, but good question. That actually reflects what's on the property now, for the most part, and that's Kendall at Longwood. So it already has high-density residential on it. There is a part of that property, I believe, that, am I correct, Janine, that...
The northern part is in cultural conservation.
Yeah.
That's the open part still.
Yeah, but I mean, the part that's zoned high-density residential, is part of that also Longwood? Or do we keep all of that out?
That's Kendall.
It's all Kendall? Okay, so that's all Kendall. So there's no change, it reflects what it is.
But previously it was R4, so you're changing it to HDR.
Once again, I don't know how to explain this any better. R4 is the zoning district, and high-density residential is sort of how development is seen in the future.
What I see is, if you make that at HDR, 100 years from now, someone will change it to, a mixed or use or something, because those homes will eventually be replaced. So I think you're setting a wrong precedent because you have Longwood Gardens there, and in future, I'm looking at 100 years from now. Then that whole area could be, a developer could come in and do whatever, and the next zoning board will look at it and say, oh, this is a nice piece of land, let's put multi-story homes and stuff like that. So I think if you want to preserve the Longwood Gardens, adjacent areas, you want to probably not do that.
But you understand the distinction?
Yeah, no, I understand that. But I'm just saying that it's not a good idea for future to put something like that when you don't want to have a high-density area right next to the Longwood Gardens.
Now, let's go over here, see if we have anybody.
Gwen Lacey with the Land Conservancy for Southern Chester County, a.k.a. Kennett Township Land Trust. I just wanted to ask, when there's been a lot of talk about the special studies, have you or are you considering a cost of community services for this planning and eventual zoning in Kennett Township? I bring that up because most expensive to taxpayers is residential. And for infrastructure, schools, roads, emergency access. Is there a cost of community services study being considered for any of this planning?
At this point, no.
Okay.
We're familiar with the concept. I think the Brandywine Conservancy has done a lot along those lines, and it's an important tool.
So we would encourage that. And along with the regional planning, I know some townships have gotten together and redone their zoning to accommodate. It can be done. It's difficult, but it can be done, and it's really worth it, because we look at traffic as one of the number one offenders. And traffic doesn't confine itself to a township. People cross township boundaries all the time, nor do schools, nor do emergency, anyway, so you know that. The other thing is, we have a great open space tax in Kennett, and you've all contributed to it. And so it's allowed us, just in this township alone, to conserve over 500 acres. 250 plus of that is open to the public in nature preserves and trails. And I bring that up because it knows no zoning. Conservation just requires willing landowners. It doesn't matter where your property is zoned. So I'd encourage anyone, the way we can keep the high density from happening, the way we can keep our traffic in check is through conservation. And you pay for that through your open space tax. So I wanted to put that out there. Last thing is just future planning. Please include sidewalks, walkable communities. what we saw happen on McFarland Road could so easily have been avoided. Having sidewalks, kids can run right to the high school from apartment complexes, which did require, I believe it was a conditional use hearing for that density. And that's something that hasn't been raised about the HDR and R4. R4 has by right, but then there's special exceptions and conditional uses. So you can't just go in and put the apartment buildings and whatnot without special zoning hearing board affirmation and vote. So I just wanted to put that out there for walkable communities, because traffic is killing us all over, and it knows no boundaries for townships. Thanks.
Can I just say something? I'm talking not as a, I'll take my planning commission hat off, but thank you, Gwen, and thank you for everything you've done for TLC, for Southern Chester County, and we need to support it even more. Join as members. Gwen has a great organization, and if we all were members, we could be giving more.
Thank you.
All right, I'm Darren Rondo, I'm right in the corner. First question is, why do you guys divide property into two different high-density residential area and conservation area? You have land parcels divided between two areas.
Which parcels?
Bottom left, southwest corner. Bottom left, southwest corner, HDR, conservation area.
You mean adjacent to my property?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Did you know we were having 900 houses?
I thought it was 930.
You need to change your chapter 8 if you don't want people interpreting it that way. So I don't believe it's that funny.
What are we doing here?
The cell phones are doing the rainbow.
It says something about no HDR.
Good neighbors.
Do you find it?
Amber work, Mary.
Are we talking about the old Rouse property where, is it different on the east side than it is on the west side?
No, I'm talking about, you got the Chester County water main line coming through, which is why it's more feasible to have a HDR there, because you have 48-inch water supply and you have sanitary sewer capacity for it, which is understandable, but I still disagree with it. Anyhow, but I'm talking about down in the southwest corner of Kennett Square Borough, between Chandler Mill Road and your lot, which is our lot. You have it subdivided in between RC and HDR. Why are parcels divided? When you have wetlands down there, which would make sense, they're RC.
To give a boundary along the road.
Yeah, probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, so more consideration should go into this
Yeah,
planning, all right?
You wanted to give a buffer along the road?
So you
That's
can
why
just probably
if you
extend
look
the
all
RC all the way
along,
across.
Oh, okay. No, I wasn't aware
if you
of
look
that.
all along Chandler Mill, there's little, like ins and outs all along the road to give a buffer along the road, is what the
okay.
township's justification was.
Okay. That's the rationale. I don't know.
What was that rationale? I didn't-
Could you say it a little louder?
Do you want to say it in the microphone?
No, would you say it? I think you explained it better, because I missed that part.
But if you look all along Chandler Mill Road along the future land use map, which is this one, you'll see that there's kind of ins and outs, there's juts, and there's parts that come closer to the road. And the Township Planning Commission wanted to have buffers along that road. So the suburban residential, high-density residential, et cetera, more intensive development didn't just abut the road, was the justification for that particular split right near the HDR, right below the AI, and in the RC.
But in general, we weren't trying to have a parcel.
Yeah, probably have it all one. And also have a second
So that we have to
question.
look at that.
Again, your zoning doesn't change for the parcel.
Yeah, I know this is a leeway to rezoning, I understand that as well. Second question is traffic. Yeah. Has any structural analysis has been done on the bridge on Hillendale Road? Since the bridge on Chandler Mill Road is deficient to carry any traffic volume if residential homes are built?
I'm going to let you answer that because you are more up on what's going on that than we are.
That is not our, Hillendale's not our bridge.
No, there's a bridge there, but it's not
It's
county.
not our bridge.
Oh, it's the county bridge.
And they just did a repair to it. We do have the latest inspection on it, which I'd be happy to give to you. It is not our bridge to inspect. It is the county's bridge.
Yeah.
But I'd be happy to give you the latest inspection.
Yeah. Have you incorporated that into your planning though?
That bridge?
Yes.
That's not our bridge.
I know. Traffic, increased traffic will be crossing that bridge.
Yes.
Have you incorporated that into your design?
I would have to ask them about
You guys haven't?
No, we haven't looked specifically at that.
Alright. And Chandler Road Bridge, you guys are still in the planning phase for that, right? Deciding what to do with that?
The planning commission is not, the supervisors are, and they will take a vote on ownership of that bridge next Wednesday, the 5th.
I believe that once those two decisions are made, I think it would be better to do planning then, based on the given scenario of the environment, because you can't rezone or plan an area without fully understanding the area encompassing around it.
Hi, my name is Carol Kearns, and I live in Ashford, which is off of Route 1 and 52, south of Route 1. I guess I've heard, as you guys all introduce yourselves in your area of expertise, some common themes with traffic, sewer issues, trying to do the high density around the borough because they do have an infrastructure. I'm concerned that Kennett Township has not planned accordingly to have that infrastructure in place. I hear Gwen saying, hey, we have dedicated open space because we fund that. I think there's another way to do this. I think if you have builders that are coming in to develop and build in the township, to put certain stipulations on them to help you with that infrastructure. Turning lanes that are, acceleration, deceleration lanes. The septic system is a huge concern to me. We pay an enormous amount of money to flush our toilets, literally. So stuff like that, trying to do the high-density area around the borough, I think is just going to continue to overcrowd that area. I'm not sure, obviously, everybody else in the room doesn't want it, so I'm not saying that there's a better area to put it, but it is a concern that it's already a congested area when we travel through there, that it's just going to become that much more congested. And then maybe something for you, Officer McCarthy, is more and more truck traffic on 52 that shouldn't be there. So I don't know how to handle that, but there's just, it's overall concern that we're not doing the right planning. It's the zoning and all that is a great concern, but I think the whole infrastructure in the township has to be looked at as part of that planning.
Just out of curiosity, what do you mean to look at it? To expand it? Or?
I lived in another township that had issues with fast growth and coming up with that dedicated space, doing that through township money and, taxes is great, but if you can also make builders dedicate some of their space, and you've done that in some places.
Yeah,
like Balmoral, you're saying it's deeded, restricted, but it's very few and far between because I don't hear that other people are saying, hey, but that you could change that tomorrow. Once it's dedicated, it's dedicated.
Yeah, well, we have a fee in lieu of open space, which is, what is that now?
Well, it all depends on the condition.
Okay, it depends on but basically, we take money from developers.
Right.
As part of the approval process. to go towards acquisition of open space. As far as sort of a different issue, sewer, we had looked at, I'm going to get my numbers right, Act 537. We looked at that some years ago when we were more constrained with the number of units that were available, and we were trying to find some way to encourage spray irrigation, which would enhance the amount of open space in the township. We found with the destruction of the cannery that there were a lot of units, but I think we're still, not within the planning commission, but the township is looking at sewer needs, aren't they? And undergoing a specific study.
And Jim, also in Chapter 10 of the comp plan, we would be speaking towards at least the infrastructure. Perhaps not to the depth of a study, but part of it is just the recognition of some of the same concerns that you're bringing up.
Right, because the gentleman over there was worried about bridges and how many people I'm worried about how many people are living in a single-family home, or how many people can flush their toilet.
Right.
And I'm not even getting, to that point, but it all goes together with the planning.
There is a chapter on transportation where traffic counts and that sort of thing would have been addressed. That wasn't what the Planning Commission wanted to talk about tonight.
Okay.
There's a chapter on infrastructure. And I also want to emphasize on the future land use map, what you're talking about, dedication of open space and open space residential developments. Much of what you're seeing as RR, which is that light yellow color, if you look at it, and then you compare it to, if you look online, the open space mapping, you'll see that the township has done a great job in preserving open space through those developments. And the vast majority of RR reflects the open space developments that have occurred.
Okay.
Gentlemen's been waiting a while.
Okay.
Thank you. My name is Joe D'Antonio, 615 Millers Hill. Just wanted to tip my hat to the Township Committee and Officer McCarthy here for doing a fantastic job, I think, in the Kennett Square area as well as the Township or the borough. Being a resident, born and raised, this town has come alive, and I think it's been fantastic. So I just wanted to thank you. My other point, I should say, the Blevins tract, Millers Hill and the surrounding areas. I don't have a long story, but I too feel the concern about the high density thoughts about tract being put in that property. When Kristen and I bought this house 10 years ago, we knew that this property was zone BP, and that allowed commercial zoning, a small attorney or some other professional property or person to buy this property if we chose to sell. The concern, and it's across from Giordano's and other attorneys, Waywood Beverage, there's a few places up on the hill as well. With the concern of high density, it being residential, my concern is what's the value of our property going to be? Because we painstakingly have put constant effort into making our house better, thinking down the road that if we do these improvements, that we have to think in mind of someone else buying this property. So my concern is what is going to happen if this, knowing the property behind us was zoned commercial, switches over, and is that going to devalue our property for future use? Are we going to have, just like the Falcon Layer, have a 50-foot tall building to stare at? I don't have the tape of Bambi and Thumper. However, I was moved by that comment. I'm moved by a lot of these people's comment. And what is the township, where are the studies that show that this township needs all this high density?
Exactly.
I don't understand. I would like to know, I think a lot of these people would like to see the study that would support the high density. It's, to me, a lot of questions still need to be answered. Thank you.
This is the time to ask them. This is the time to ask them. So we have any more?
I got one more.
My name is Mike Pia. I'm currently one of the partners in the Kennett Business Park, which is one of the special study areas that you identified just west of the borough. Kennett Business Park is previously the Nosneski Junkyard, for those of you that have been around for a while. We currently have that property zoned, has been for a number of years, as a business park for about 200,000 square feet of building. My understanding is it's being looked at as potential for mixed use, which we support. We feel that's a good use for that property, given its proximity to the borough, being walkable to town, the fact that there's infrastructure available. It seems to us to be an appropriate place to put high-density mixed-use, both residential, commercial, office, that sort of thing. So we're in favor of seeing that particular property rezoned. I think it's a more appropriate use for that particular site. So just wanted to express that. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's work our way around here again and through the back, I think.
Some of these have already had questions. Can I get to those that haven't? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's what I'd love to do.
My name's Erin Bobo, and I live across the street from the cornfield with Bambi and Bunny. And, my question is, you said now's the time to ask questions. And so I would love to understand what is next after tonight, because we're not going to all be here until 1 in the morning. And obviously, there's a lot of emotion around high-density residential areas that are being proposed, planned, because it affects all the things we've been talking about, traffic, the value of our homes. We have an emotional tie, most of us, to choosing to live here because of all the open space that the township's done a great job at securing, and it affects all of that. Affects our views, all this stuff. That has a high emotional charge to it. And so my question is, what is next after tonight? How do we, if vast majority of this room does not want a high-density residential area here, there, or wherever it is that you're proposing, how do we get to affect changing that?
I think the next step will be I know the next step will be for us to get together and talk about this meeting tonight and what we've learned from it. And I think you bring up a very good point about the charged atmosphere with high-density residential. I really wasn't expecting that. I wasn't, I mean, to be honest. But anyway, I think we need to revisit it.
Okay, well, I do
And I think what we then need to do is reasonably soon for government work to convene another meeting like this. And I mean, we really do want your input. And we really do want to know
I guess
what's
I'm
going
wanting
on.
to understand, well, there's two things I want to comment on about what you just shared. Perhaps your comment on, I really didn't expect the emotional charge is because of what you stated earlier, which is that you don't have an intention to sign off on building 900 apartments or whatever it is. However, please understand that that does not appease us in any way, because you could change your mind tomorrow. And you could sell your property to somebody who doesn't give a damn about making 900 apartments. So with all due respect, that does not, I mean, I hope that that is not going to be the response that we get when we say, hey, I don't want this.
It's just not me. It's,
I
you know,
understand.
it's, the Plantington property is currently on the market.
Right,
The Reagan property is on the market.
right.
You know, we have the Ramondas who live next to me.
I guess I'm saying that it doesn't.
So, no, I don't, I
It comes back
understand
to, it
that.
doesn't really matter who owns the property and what their intention is today for their property or who they sell it to. The important thing is what you have on this map here and what's decided, because as this gentleman said about the HDR over there near Longwood, if it's proposed that way, whether it happens next year or 100 years from now, it can happen, and that's what's scary, because we don't know if it's going to happen next year, or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, and it doesn't matter who owns the land right now, quite frankly. And so I guess I'm just looking ahead. I want to know what kind of a voice do we have if 90% of us that live, for instance, on West Hillendale, but I'm concerned about the whole township. Of course, I'm concerned about West Hillendale. I live there. I own a property there that would be drastically affected by that. However, I think my fear comes from not really knowing what kind of voice we have. If all of us don't want it, do we get a, sorry, it has to happen because the law says we have to have this much a percentage of affordable housing? Sorry, we hear your voice, but too bad. I mean, that's what I'm not understanding, and that is what's behind my question of what's next and what kind of voice do we have.
Aside from, you know, the timetable that I sort of set out, I think that another important thing, if to have that sort of interest, is important to get involved with the township, to come to planning commission meetings and find out what projects are actually being proposed in Kennett Township, where we're seeing actual proposals for very high density and buildings close to 50 feet. You need to be aware of those, and to be aware of them, you need to come to our planning commission meetings. I would also suggest that there is always room in this township for volunteers to get involved in other committees and other boards that have openings. We have a historic commission, we have a safety committee, we have environmental advisory council. All of them report not only to the planning commission but also to the supervisors and have a voice in township government. So it depends on how much of a commitment you're willing to put into this, and you're certainly welcome. Many of us who are on this planning commission today got here because we got involved in a controversial subdivision at the time and got interested and got involved.
Mr. Chairman, before I move on, it doesn't seem walking around here that this is not the township, that you're required to do this. Can you explain that? That you're required to update the zoning ordinances every so often?
The municipality's planning code by law requires us to update the comprehensive plan about every 10 years. So what we do typically is we wait for the most current census to end, when the data is then available to us, and then we use that as the basis, as one of the bases for the comprehensive plan. So that's sort of why the timing is always around this. We've been working on it for close to 2 years. And, you know, we are not finished. As I said, we have to do the fair share analysis next. As far as, maybe it would be important to say, the adoption of the plan. And that's probably the most critical next step. We would hold a public hearing at the Planning Commission and make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, and then the supervisors would have a hearing to adopt it. We, as a Planning Commission, only make recommendations. We do not adopt the comprehensive plan or any of the zoning ordinances. We sort of do the footwork and we present it to the supervisors, and they have the final say.
Jim, based on where we are right now, what sort of in line with your question, when would you anticipate the Planning Commission doing something?
I was anticipating before tonight that we would we were thinking of like March or April, because it's going to take another month or two to do the
fair share to
the fair share analysis. But I think there's been enough emotion that's been brought up that we need to bring the residents along with us, because this is your plan. I mean, this is our plan. We're all residents of this township. We need to come to a consensus. And we are not opposed to that at all in this planning commission. We're not trying to impose anything on you. And that's why we had this meeting tonight, to air, any concerns that we were not aware of.
I was just going to say, in terms of everyone understanding process and commitment and time and everything, you may think, oh, 2 years, my gosh, you've been working on this for 2 years, why isn't it done? But the Planning Commission meets, as you know, the first Tuesday of every month, an hour, 2 hours, a half an hour, whatever plans are before us. The second Tuesday of every month, we have a work session. And our work sessions usually are 2 hours, sometimes they're a little longer. And those are the sessions in which we've moved forward with this plan. In addition to those meetings, oftentimes we have projects that the Planning Commission is looking at, and we have subcommittees. There are 3 subcommittees, 3 people on each of the 3 subcommittees. And in addition, we have other committee meetings each month. So this isn't something that we're working on 4 nights during the month. That's why it may seem like a very long, drawn-out process, but it's not the only thing that is happening, although right now it's the focus of our work sessions.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Richard Statt, resident, 40 years here. The distinction between land use categories that are set out in the comprehensive plan versus zoning categories, which are a different process but kind of overlaid and somewhat dependent on land use categories, has been made clearly here tonight, I think, though some may have been temporarily confused. My question is on the zoning side, not on the land use side, just from a process standpoint. Am I correct that a property can be rezoned either at the initiation of the landowner or at the initiation of the township? At least an application for rezoning can be initiated by the township or by the landowner.
I would answer that question this way. To change a zoning district or to change the zoning ordinance, there are 3 ways that it can be changed. First, it can come from the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission can work on the zoning ordinance and make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, and it's a product of the Planning Commission, passed by the Board. The second way is the Board of Supervisors can initiate a change in this zoning ordinance, but it must be reviewed by the Planning Commission before it can be enacted. And the third would be from the property owner, which is in the form of, I believe it's called curative amendment, in which they would make the case that your zoning map does not provide for a particular use, and therefore it's deficient, and then can petition to change for the change, and the township does not accept it, then it can be taken to court, and the court would change it if that applicant prevailed.
So there are 3 methods, one initiated by the landowner, one initiated by the supervisor, one initiated by the Planning Commission. In consideration of any of those 3 routes, whether or not the change would be adopted by the supervisors at the end of the day would be to some extent dependent on how compatible the proposed zoning was with the land use category that was established in the comprehensive plan. My final question, all of that was just to set the stage for what I'm actually going to ask, which is, does the Planning Commission, or to the Planning Commission's knowledge, do the supervisors intend to initiate any rezonings based on whatever comprehensive plan may be adopted perhaps next year?
I would say only in one case is there any discussion of that occurring right now. Not that it couldn't occur on any of them. But the whole Miller's Hill project, which is currently zoned BP, and we have developers in who want to build an apartment complex there, that would require a zoning change. And that is That is being presented before us as a sketch plan. We have taken no position on it, except it does reflect the high-density residential with some of those figures that
Can you point to that?
you showed. Where is
Keep
Miller's
going, yeah, where is
Hill? Miller's Hill is right up here. This triangular piece of property, which abuts as you're coming into Kennett, it would be on the right-hand side. It's behind the small houses on Miller's Hill, and it's the big open field. And the big open field faces towards Nixon Park. So if you went down Walnut Street and you look back up, you would see a big field. That's where there is a proposal for a change for, well, there's not a proposal that's on record formally, but it's being discussed.
My question was not for a proposal that is initiated by a landowner, but is it your expectation that...
Is it the planning commission's expectation that the planning commission itself, or to its knowledge, the supervisors themselves will initiate, not at the request of a landowner, but on their own, any zoning changes as a result of a comprehensive plan to be adopted?
I can't answer that, in all honesty, because I'm one of 9, and I think it would depend on the specific condition, and I'm not sure that we would all be of the same vote on that. That would be my read. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So, don't know.
When you don't know, you have to say you don't know.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
I have one more. So I do have a question about the space that used to be occupied by Exelon.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Isn't Exelon primarily gone from that space? Isn't there?
No.
Okay. I retract.
Rather important. Something new?
Well, one thing to remember is there are 2 more buildings that are approved for the Exelon site that have not yet been built.
Has Exelon renewed?
Renewed? I can't answer that. We wouldn't be privy to that. Okay, we have a man with the microphone.
I'm George Reaver. I'm a resident of West Hillendale. So I'm going back to the property that you're part owner and the rest of it from Chandler Mill to Union Street, bordered by Hillendale and the Township, or the borough. We're looking at part of the studies. Part of the studies, obviously, you have to have traffic studies. So my question is the 2-part. In order to complete your comprehensive plan, you'll have to complete your studies. Is that correct?
No,
Well,
because
how can you make a valuable decision based on traffic, environmental issues? I would presume also, since that one plot is 75% wooded, agricultural, open space, that there'll be some ecological studies there for rare species like...
Actually, I think what would happen is some of our recommendations for the comp plan, the comprehensive plan, each chapter ends up with a series of recommendations, sort of like action items for the next step. In those areas where all of us would be thinking, and probably you, that traffic and those other concerns, the recommendation would then be to initiate that traffic study, initiate the sewage studies and things of that nature.
I understand that, but the comprehensive plan actually is a framework for the next step, which is going to be zoning. So to make a valid zoning decision, they're going to be reading the comprehensive plan. And in order to make that decisive decision, the correct decision, they would have to have those studies, correct?
More than likely, depending on what the subject is, yes. In order to make a proper decision, at some point additional data is going to be needed, yes.
I am Chris Alonso. I live in Hamilton Village up in the north part of the township. My question's actually more towards the county, because I think over time the county's been working on housing studies and traffic studies. So can those be made available? I mean, I know questions are asked towards what the Kennett Township studies are, but the county actually has studies, multiple county connections or the whole county together. So are those available or can be provided?
The majority of our studies, if not all of our studies, are on our website. You can go to chesco.org or you can go to landscapes2.org. Landscapes 2 is the county comprehensive plan, and we have a lot of the studies and information on that, which is directly accessible through chesco.org. But the director of the Planning Commission is very much about putting information out there and particularly using our website to the maximum amount possible. So studies we've done, you would find on those websites. And a lot of the partner communities also have those studies on their websites.
Do you still have the community profiles? Community profiles,
It's in a different format though, it's
Yeah.
not web-based.
used to be I could read them.
Yeah.
But they provide, a wealth of information, the type of information that is in the comp plan for a broader area. What we tried to do in our comp plan in the text is for the data is to include our neighboring municipalities so that you can compare what's going on between Kennett, Upson, Pennsbury, and New Garden. And I believe we also, did we finally include East Marlboro? I'm not sure we did.
We included East Marlboro.
Okay. And the borough of Kennettsville. So you can, that's an interesting resource to look up.
And the demographic information from the chapter he's speaking about is currently on Kennett's website. I'm not sure if Chris is referencing maybe the Southern Chester County Transportation and Housing Study.
Yeah, that is one of them. And
Okay.
I was lucky enough to actually be involved in landscapes too. I'm a mushroom farmer, and they wanted my input on agriculture as well as, everything else. So one of the challenges that the group in front of you is faced with is that the county does some of these studies and says, hey, landscapes too, the residents of Chester County want open space. The residents of Chester County want, less dense, less housing, tons of housing on 1 and 2 acre parcels. And the residents want less traffic, etc. So the county comes out and has presented the challenge to each of the townships to reduce traffic and to create open space, and therefore they're saying we need higher density locations, because what they're finding is like 20% of the people that work in Chester County drive from other counties, Delaware, Lancaster, Bucks, etc. So they're saying we need higher density that people can afford to live here and therefore not create as much traffic. But in addition, they're saying, oh, that's easy, do that and preserve open space at the same time. So I just want to give a little credit that this is county-driven down. It's not these 9 people in front of you having the idea of what's going on. They're taking the county's ideas and trying to, make it work in Kennett Township.
Thank you, Chris.
Dave Adamson, 621 Millers Hill. Jim, twice tonight you described the Blevins track as being next to the park. It would be helpful if you would also mention, when describing it, that it is also next to the 415-employee Exelon building with 2 empty pad sites, which will probably be developed someday. That way it doesn't sound like, oh, it's this big meadow that's right next to the park. It is right next to the park if you want to go across the street, and there's been some discussion about that there's no access to the park, especially because Hazel Road would had to have some problems there. But it would be nice if people could live there in high density, thereby meeting some standards that the people on Hill and Dale Road wouldn't have to, maybe their land could be preserved. And if these people could walk to Exelon or to Genesis or Chatham Financial and not have to use a car. That was the whole idea. High density is not always bad. It keeps the people off the road. You need 2 parking spaces if you need one at home and one at work. Thank you.
Okay, do we have anybody else?
Hi, Steve Kobloski. I live near the Hillendale HDR tract. This is my first time involved in any of these meetings, so forgive some of my ignorance, but I'm trying to figure out, the gentleman that was here first and spoke about his green land being appointed a different name. It went to R2, I guess, in the upper right-hand corner. Dr. Coggins. Is it just as easy for him to say, okay, change that, and you'll change it? Because I think what everybody wants to know is, like, when did those HDRs get added, and to that development, to that future zoning map, and how do we go about working with you guys to change it or reorganize it? I mean, I realize we can't have a motion here to just do it, but what do we do as a community to work with you to find new areas for this? I mean, do we attend more meetings? Is that, I mean,
Basically,
do
what
I
I
join
said
a board?
the young lady,
Right.
if you want. Yeah, be involved. Be involved.
I think you need to come to our meetings.
Right.
Yeah, because, developers spend many man-hours and thousands of dollars presenting their point of view. And so, we want to be responsible to the public, we want to be responsive to the community, but you have to let us know what's on your mind. If you don't come to our meetings and don't speak out, then, we're sort of left to guess about what the community wants. We try to use our best judgment. Maybe that's it. I think this is an example of that didn't work very well.
So how do we define what we do to challenge the newly assigned future zoning segments that the first gentleman spoke about, that Hillendale is speaking about, if you wanted to challenge it?
Come to our planning session.
Okay.
The second Tuesday of every month.
Cool.
7:30, or 7 o'clock, I'm sorry, in this building.
Okay.
I would urge you to come to those meetings and speak out.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think when you use the word challenge, in a sense, that's what you're doing now. That I'm reading challenge as providing the input, and that's why we're here.
I didn't know if we needed a certain amount of signatures,
No.
petitions to get you guys to, like, how do we get the HDR taken off of the future zoning? Just, I mean, do we just ask you guys, and you do it?
I think you get it.
It's highly unlikely that HDR would be removed, because high-density residential is probably something that we have to consider.
What was it before
Why there?
it was HDR?
Well, hold on. See, that's part of both the fun and excitement and the problem. At some point, HDR has to be considered. And of course, whoever yelled out, but not there, right? Part of the question that we're trying to understand then is where? Yes, we have heard from you guys, right? That neighborhood that said not there. Well, where else might we want to put it?
To repurpose some of the red.
And maybe we end up saying, no, we don't want to do it at all. But then, just as we were saying, then we have some other issues that we have to contend with.
You guys changed that designation. When was it changed? I mean, I don't know.
It hasn't been changed.
No, zoning hasn't been changed with the HDR.
Admittedly, the one area that I'm taking to heart, right?
Nothing's changed.
In the 2000s?
I regret
And the
the wordings that were used, because obviously, somewhere along the line, we're using the HDR as a future land use category. The zoning has not changed. It's still R4. And so obviously, we either have to change what we're doing in terms of the terminology that we're using, but even if we just said Area A, Area B, Area C, the fundamental zoning is still R4 at this time.
So I think the question is, okay, I'm Bob Bridges, I live in 102 Quail Lane in Falcons Lair. So I think the question is, what do we mean by HDR? So it sounds as if the definition may have been changed. Is it 9 to 13,
8 to 15.
8 to 15 units per acre? Is it 4-story buildings? Or is it something that sounds as if in previous definition, you know, if this is supposed to be direction for the zoning commission in the future, and if that is the definition, then as residents, we might be expecting that developers would come in and do that.
Well, the only way, I'm going to take a stab at answering this because it's kind of interesting, and I have to admit, from my own point of view, right, so I'm not speaking for anybody else, density right now is not even a factor because I'm focusing on the land use. The density becomes the second piece of that puzzle. And admittedly, when this gentleman started saying referencing the density factors and so forth, right? The chapters that are out there on the website may not even be correct. They may not even be the current copy. And in fact, that's one of the notes that I'm taking because density is not part. Yes, density is considered, density is talked about, but there's no formula. I'm not sitting here saying, geez, HRD is therefore 15 or 20.
So I think the point of view, at least my point of view, is that there's a pretty significant difference between, you know, having a few townhouses here and there and having this kind of 4-story building and high, you know, and many units on an acre.
Agree.
And so I think if we need to have 2 categories for it, it's fine. If we need to clarify it and say that's not what we mean by it, that's fine. But if we're going to leave the HDR term on there, we need to make clear that that's not what it means. Because what I'm hearing is I don't think that's what you want. I don't think that's what you want, but somehow it's not being communicated clearly.
Oh yeah, that's definitely the message. Thank you.
Just going back to the same point, I disagree with you because every label up there, HDR, has a definition associated with it. And the definition that we're seeing associated with that, 8 to 15 units, 50-foot height limitation. And just going one step further, when you do get into high-density areas like in the borough of Kennett, the average building there is 3 stories or less.
Yeah.
So just as a comparison, now you're jumping up to 50 feet, which is close to 5 stories.
The only thing that I'm going to tell you, the Chapter 7 is the land use plan.
Right.
And the definition is in Chapter 7.
No, it's in Chapter 8.
Chapter 7 is the future land use plan.
Yeah, but...
And that's the definition that I'm operating on.
I think it's fair to say that there's enough confusion with definition.
Oh, yeah.
And some, I mean, that's something we have to revisit.
Yeah.
We have to revisit.
Yeah, I'd just like to make, again, it's not so much a question as a comment or two. The existing land use plan map, John Halberstadt, John Halberstadt from Falcon's Lair. The existing land use plan map that is included in the handout does not use the same terms as the proposed new land use map does. So when you say those were already in existence, if they were, it's completely opaque to me, and I suspect to a lot of other people. It is a complete new set of terms.
In the prior comp plan. And yes,
So we have a whole new set of terms.
No, I think aren't you saying that the terminology for the existing land use is different than the terminology for the future land use?
Correct. You have used a new set of terms.
It is different, and it's always been different. It's different in your current plan. The existing land use only reflects what is on the ground today. It's not a judgment of what's going to be there in the future. It's not... The existing land use reflects what is on the ground today, so the designations have to be very specific. Is it agriculture? Is it multifamily? Is it a twin? Is it a single family? Is it a single family that's a more rural parcel, et cetera, on and on? The future land use categories are a policy decision on your part, the township's part, of where you want to go with areas in the future. So those would be very different sets of terminology. You're not going to say in a future land use category, this entire area, let's say, that's currently shown in existing land use as multifamily, you're not necessarily going to say in the future land use category that the whole thing is going to be called multifamily. So they're different types of terminology. They are intended to be.
But it's so radically different, the existing use and the proposed use is radically different.
Because I don't want to... Okay, that's fine. So we don't have the existing plan map in the package handed out. We have a zoning map on the screen, and we have existing land use map, but we do not have the existing comprehensive plan map from the last one that was made. So
That's
we
not
haven't
your
seen that.
correct.
So
That's
we're
correct.
again, we're kind of blind as to what we're
That's currently on
seeing.
your website, though, your current comp plan.
The next point I would make, is the mic still on? Yeah. The next point I would make would be that the land use plan terms, as they're shown, are undefined in here. I mean, as we look at this package, a group of people have apparently got terms from a Section 8 or something like that. I was not armed with something like that. So for another group of us, those plans are completely undefined, other than what has been kind of tossed around here tonight. The third point I would make is just, you said you're seeking to do this by consensus, and I think it's pretty clear the consensus of an awfully lot of people who live in the area of a proposed land use plan along Hillendale there do not want to see that be HDR. So in your future deliberations as you meet, if you're looking for consensus, you know where the consensus lies with the group.
Could I just ask a question? Could I assume that those who are opposed to the HDR, that you're also opposed to the current zoning of R4?
Since you're looking at me, I'll answer it for one person in the row. Okay, and I have the mic. And I speak solely for myself. First of all, I don't know the details of the R4 zoning, but I gather that is like about 1 acre or less housing is what it involves, but it is not multi-story brick complexes, et cetera. It's, pardon?
It could be.
R4 could be. Okay.
Yeah, supervisor approval, it could be.
Then-
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, then I suspect that a lot of us would not be in favor of that. And I've got to add, I mean, people have mentioned traffic several times. Traffic in that area, increasing housing in that area, in a multi-family density, is going to be a huge problem with a one-lane bridge going west on Hillendale, and the Chandler Mill Road Bridge out. That's gone. And when you try, even right now, trying to get out of Falcon's Lair and head on to Hillendale is a hazard every day. And frankly, 70% of my trips go south. I noticed that in your write-up, you point out that a lot of the growth here is because of jobs south of us in Delaware. When you head south out of that area, the logical way out of Falcon's Lair is out Chandler's Mill. You can't go that way. Now we have to go through 5 Points. And that just increases that whole traffic congestion in that area. So I think there's a lot of reasons not to put multifamily there. And I'll let it go at that. I mean,
Thank you.
I have a couple, this is David Lewis again.
Yeah.
I have a couple recommendations for you. I've seen other townships, they're developing engineering guidelines for HDR. So they're becoming more specific as to what HDR really means. I would highly suggest that we go ahead and develop similar guidelines so that people know what they're talking about when they're talking about HDR. Secondly, other townships have also developed multiple definitions of HDR, HDR1, 2, et cetera, to meet different problems they're trying to solve. Trying to scoop this underneath of one particular HDR category, I think, is just going to confuse people as we move forward. I would also recommend that the group support a HDR working committee that is made up of members of your planning committee, but also members of the public that can meet at other times other than just your sessions, because a couple hours may not be enough to pull that off. And also support public presentations of alternatives, because I think it's easy to walk in here and criticize, but I think we can also, there's a lot of smart people in this room, and we can come up with some different ideas of how to meet the problems that you're also trying to solve, and give you some other ideas. So I think a more active participation will get you a much calmer audience. So with that, that's basically all I have at this point. So.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Diaz. I don't have a skin in the HDR game, but I just wanted to make an observation. I acknowledge all the emotion because, we've been part of having developments around us and whatnot. But I also wanted to say I've had the opportunity to sit in another local townships meeting, and I just wanted to say that these guys are being really, really good to listen to the folks that do have the concerns. So I just wanted to kind of put in a word that even though y'all, have an impact, the willingness of this group of people to listen to y'all is orders of magnitude greater than what I saw in township meetings that I've been sitting in that have some other zoning ramifications. So I think that what you just suggested about having a working committee, I think these folks seem to be reasonable and will work with you.
Thank you very much.
I just want to sort of reinforce what Dave said about coming to planning commission meetings. It doesn't have to be a project that you're particularly interested in or that is even close to you, but you can learn a lot about the process, about different projects, maybe in the other end of the township. But by coming and following along, developers spend not just months, but years, going through a project. Not that you've come to every meeting, but I think you can learn a lot from the variety of projects and seeing how the process works, even if it doesn't impact you at all or you don't care about the project.
I would say it would impact, because you would see what's going on in another part of the township and realize that could happen in your neck of the woods. So it's important to look at the whole township. And, one of the things I think we try to do on the Planning Commission is to be open to people. This is our, I've said it a couple of times, but it's our township. We're all residents here, and we all care about it. So we need to listen to you, and you need, to be involved. It's what we should be doing.
Do you have one last question?
You said you were finished.
I got one more. And then
Here comes the mic.
Oh, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can. Now, I want everybody to hear it. It goes out there.
Oh, okay. I just want to get just an understanding, because here's what I think I heard from you tonight, is that today you're not supportive of having high-density residential housing on your property.
Today, I'm not supporting high-density residential. Okay, let me see what I said. I did say that I have not had any discussions with anyone, realtors or developers, about high-density residential on my property or selling it. I've owned the property that I'm on now for 25 years. I've had people in the past who are concerned who are now long gone, and I still own my property. I cannot guarantee that I would never have to sell it. No one can make that guarantee. But as I said, I was born here. I've taken an interest in this township by serving on the planning commission. I have tried to do my best over the years to make sure that the development that does happen in Kennett Township is responsive, and that we do get open space, and that we're pretty well protected. That's where
Let me
I
ask the
stand.
question a little differently then. You said the plan has to be put together probably by April of next year. Is that about the time frame?
I said that would be when we would when we hoped to be able to recommend it to the supervisors for it to be enacted.
Okay, so you've seen a rather large support for not doing this.
Yes.
Are you on the side of the public, or are you on Jim Guthrie's side to go ahead and distribute them?
It's not fair.
That's not a fair question, I think.
I think it's a very fair question.
You do, but...
Well, more fair is this easy than the county.
No.
Let me have it. I'm going around.
That's it.
Okay, we done.
I got one.
So you want to answer the question?
Thank you. Bob Perry, 131 West Hillendale. I come from background of construction. My family owned construction businesses, and I grew up in that industry, and it's where I started my career before I went to the Department of Defense. And in Chapter 7, you put out one plan. But in Chapter 8, you leave the front door wide open. And my family would have utilized that 100% against you. So, Chapter 8, totally null and voids Chapter 7.
Okay, thanks. Okay, do we have anything else?
Hi, I'm Beth Thomas, I'm at 126 West Hillendale. I just have a question. You opened the door to say, is this really anything we want to proceed with the HDR at all? What if we decide, no, we don't want to have any of it in our township? What are the ramifications?
The ramifications, and I'll let Janine add to it, but I imagine that the biggest ramification would be that we would be sued for being exclusionary, and that we didn't provide for high-density residential in our township. And then the developer would come in and be able to build not to Kennett Township specifications, but to court specifications from a judge to approve a plan. We did have that happen in Kennett Township on the Blanchet tract, which we got into a court case, and we settled, we did not win, and the final development plan was determined by a court. But I would say the major ramifications would be the challenges for fair share. Would you add anything, Janine?
I would say the major challenges would be that Kennett would lose the ability to plan and zone for property in the township, and an outside court would do it for you. And that has happened in other municipalities in Chester County as well. So it's not a futile, it's not a futile idea, it does happen.
So Janine, can we get some guidelines for the next meeting on what those are? Because they significantly vary between the other townships.
I have one more question.
Which guidelines?
She interrupted, I'm sorry.
HDR.
That's right, that's right.
One more question.
I just want to know how you came about with the areas that you chose for HDR. Who made those recommendations? Who decided that's the area we're going to choose?
It's basically the same as it's been. It hasn't changed. So there wasn't a conscious decision to change it from one category to another.
Just changing the definition of what can be built there.
But you're right. If somebody, I don't know if it was you who said that, and I think that's a point that needs to be looked at, is looking at definition. Now, if the definition of high-density residential opens the door to something very different than what was in the 2004 plan or the 92 plan, I think that merits us taking another look at it. And
I think as a consensus, we would rather it be changed from R4 to something else to eliminate the HDR development altogether.
So then you're saying you're not happy with it being R4, existing R4?
No.
Because if you notice, all those HDRs are basically hovering over R4s
Right.
that exist.
Which I think we would like it changed from that.
Well, Mr. P, my name is Chip Thomas. I'm 126 West Hillendale, across the street from you. Mr. Pia seemed interested in a change of zoning for his property, perhaps too high density. So that would potentially be a property, and then the gentleman standing here was talking about potentially near the Exelon buildings. Could the board possibly investigate these sites for high density and perhaps reduce the size of the HDR in other areas?
Okay, actually, the mixed-use designation is new in this comprehensive plan. And that allows for that mix of high-density residential and commercial. So it's different from high-density residential is only residential uses. There's no commercial that would be permitted in it. The other is also high-density residential, but is with the mix of commercial.
And that would count towards the more economic housing that the HDR is trying to force down our throat, 25 words or less. In the mixed use. If high density was built there, that counts against whatever units are being forced on the township to get to whatever magical number they feel is correct.
Can you help me out?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify that in Pennsylvania, unlike New Jersey, fair share case law, and that's what this is all based on. So it's the township trying to go through case law and figure out what the magic number is, and there isn't particularly a magic number. It's depending on how the solicitor in the township interprets the case law, and different people interpret case law differently. But in Pennsylvania, fair share does not address affordability, it addresses housing type. So, and you've seen it many places in Chester County where there are multifamily units that are $500,000 units. Townhouses are considered multifamily units. We've all driven down the road saying townhouses starting at whatever. So when the township is saying they need to address multifamily, high-density housing types, they need to address multifamily. They need to address various housing types in the township, and they need to accommodate a reasonable density. Generally, the courts have found anything over 2 acres for a single-family house is considered not a reasonable density until you get to ag zoning. So municipalities that have zoning between 2 acres and what would be considered ag zoning, which generally starts at 10 acres, have been challenged as well in Chester County for saying this is not a reasonable density. So the township is trying to work with the best case scenarios they can come up with to figure out how to accommodate different types of housing, which they have to under state law, the municipality's planning code, as well as case law. This is not necessarily about affordability. A lot of people think you hear apartments, you're thinking about affordability. That's not what the township is necessarily trying to address through what they're talking about tonight. Another person referenced the Southern Chester County Housing and Transportation Study. That did talk about affordability. The township participated in that, but that was not a township initiative. That did talk about affordability. It talked about how in Kennett and the surrounding townships, there is a lack of housing for people who do common everyday jobs. Work in Wendy's, police officers, public officials, etc. That did talk about that, but that's not what the township is talking about here tonight. The township is just talking about meeting state law and meeting case law, which is providing for a variety of housing types. And that's where, I hope I'm answering your question, that's where this discussion is, okay, that's where this discussion is coming from.
That's why we say if not there, where? Because we have to figure out where it goes.
How do you figure out which residents you're going to impact? I mean, he doesn't want to buy his property, but...
Since I started that, basically by what already exists there. I mean, one of the things you'll notice is like the mixed use that Jim pointed out, that's a natural flow from the borough. It's not like we decided that's where we don't make a decision where things go. Developers come to us, and we have to provide, like Gene said, areas they can do this in. And so, if you look at the mixed use up there, the new uses of it basically just mirror the flow from the borough. And another thing, just so you know, this apartment complex that was being proposed, we've already engaged the borough in their opinion of it and how it impacts them. So it's not like we work in a, in silence here. We're quite open, and we're quite want all your opinion, which is why I'm glad to see this outcome, because it is our township, as has been said. But most of that, if you look at it, is based on what's already there, and it's kind of like the natural growth from that.
Thank you. Wendy Lofting, I live on Meadowview Lane. I just wanted to, I know we touched on this briefly, about the zoning, but shared zoning, I wanted to open that up. West Marlboro, could we share zoning? In other words, that the high density could go another place. If you've got a bunch of townships together and saying, hey, this looks like a better place rather than in a cornfield. For example, West Marlboro Township, East Marlboro Township, and Newland Township got together because West Marlboro Township did not want any high-density housing in their township. East Marlboro said, hey, we got a place to put it. So, those three townships got together and they worked together. Can we do that? I know that it didn't work one time. Do you think we can possibly open that up for, I'm sort of letting everybody know that that's what I know about,
Who do you suggest we work with?
other townships.
Okay.
I'll leave that up to you guys.
I think,
I'm opening this up for discussion.
we have, wait, hold on. We have a Kennett Area Regional Planning Commission, which is made up of Pennsbury, Kennett Township, New Garden, McKenna Borough, and Coxon. This idea has been floated several times. Most of the townships have resisted it because no one wants to be the recipient of high-density housing. That's not to say we shouldn't try again. I'm on the Kennett Area Regional Planning Commission. I represent the Township Planning Commission on the Regional Planning Commission, along with our supervisor, Scudder Stevens, who is chairman of the Regional Planning Commission. And I'll be happy to bring it up at our next regional meeting. But it hasn't, it has been discussed, and there was, when the last comprehensive plan was done, which was many, many years ago, and I was not involved with the Regional Planning Commission at that point, we couldn't even get all of the municipalities to sign off on it. Because they did, there is, protectionism for your own bailiwick.
And East Marlboro, West Marlboro, Newland do have a joint comprehensive plan, but they all function under, they do not have, they function under that plan, and that's what enabled them to take the next steps.
We were pushing to do a regional comprehensive plan, but because New Garden was embarking on theirs, and because of restrictions from funding from the county, and because I think of a lack of general appetite from the various municipalities, we have not moved forward on doing that combined plan.
Excuse me, just quickly, does it have to be those townships that you mentioned? Could we not bring East Marlboro into this? I'm just asking.
East Marlboro is already in that other, there's certain legal agreements that they've signed on to with the other communities, and they've already signed on to those legal agreements.
Can we join that group?
That would be up to those three communities in Kennett. In theory, you could join them, but if the other three communities agree to it also.
It sounds like they have a framework that they've worked out, and maybe that would be acceptable and make it easier to have a little bit more
It doesn't hurt to ask.
It doesn't hurt to ask, but I'm getting a little nervous about what you ask for here, because they could end up pushing all the more our way that you don't want. So you gotta be careful with that.
Because we have the borough, I mean, we don't have the borough, but we surround the borough, and we've got the infrastructure in terms of public water and public sewer. So, those communities could make the argument that you're the guys who should, expand the borough of Kennett Square and preserve our open space.
That's where I'm afraid we'll lead to. If you join any of the other, that's why I asked, without naming names, I asked, who would you join up with? Because anyone you join up with is going to push more towards us, not give us relief. That's what I'm saying. Be careful what you ask for.
Well, one of the things I would encourage is making sure that there's a true balance and relationship between this Chapter 7 and Chapter 8.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right. And because I'll give you one example. In Chapter 8, it says that until 2030, there's 684 units that are as the growth rate in Chapter 8. Currently, we've got multiple housing, or whatever you guys want to call it, HDR/HDR, at about 13.8%. So if you tried to maintain 13.8% with a growth rate of 684, it roughly works out to about 95 units. If you want to even promote it up to 15%, it's 141 units. So it's very much a subset of the 684, right? And I think the quantitative analysis I think you've heard people ask for makes it real important as to how many HDR areas you really need to accommodate the expected growth.
Yeah, I don't argue.
I just wanted to make a suggestion, since most of you, it would seem, are in the R4 zoning. Just for your information, you might want to go online, just so you understand truly what, since 1985, what zoning district you've been living in and what is allowable in that district, just to be informed.
I would just want to make one point. I won't bore you with planning theory. I'm relatively new on the planning commission. I'm relatively new on the planning commission, and I was sent to a planning course, and this had people from all over Chester County attending the course. And one of the things that they said, one of the principles is you put like uses together. And so the logic to the way that the high-density residential is placed is that the idea that there's very high density in the borough, and you move out from there with decreasing density. And so that was one of the reasons you can look at that thing and you can see that the high-density residential rings the borough. It's very close to the borough. And as we move out from that, it becomes less and less density. So, I mean, that's the logic behind it. And I don't want you to think that this was just something we did arbitrarily and said, okay, we put this here, without thinking about it. I mean, there is thought that went behind it.
Hey, Jim.
Sorry, mine goes on a quick tangent. So I just, one comment from me. I don't want to see any reduction in SA if there's possibilities. So,
and one other thing I might mention is that we respond to proposals that people bring to us, and the market for low density residential is not there. If the interest is any indication, we have seen virtually no proposals for rural subdivisions come in the last 2 or 3 years. And the only thing that we see come in is one high-density proposal after another. There's been a succession of, but that's what we're seeing, and that's what the market is driving. So, I mean, I don't know what you can do about the market, but that's definitely a factor out there.
Do we have any more questions or comments, or have we
Just a quick question.
covered it?
There was a proposal to put some sort of high density behind Gibson's barn at one point, wasn't there?
Leone's.
Leone property?
Yes.
And
Yeah, 2008, and things collapsed. They withdrew from the project.
Otherwise, it was on the way towards approval.
Why doesn't the
Hey.
HDR go over there? Why doesn't HDR go over to there?
Because it's closer to the borough.
Okay, yeah. It was zoned R4. And the proposal came in, there was some concerns about the multifamily being right on top of the mushrooms and on top of sort of the steep slopes. We couldn't change anything while that proposal was before us. It was grandfathered. When we redid the comp plan, we're proposing that back to the AI district, which is for mushroom zoning, specialized ag in the zoning language. And that's why it's out of high-density residential now. Did that answer your question you're looking at?
Again, it reflects the existing use. It's open there.
So is where the HDR is now, so
No.
much.
That's a bad example. The property at Gibson's is a house and a yard. I don't recall any mushroom houses there, perhaps I'm ill-informed.
Yeah, there actually are two houses, both the Leones have, Freddie Leone and Jimmy Leone lived up there. And if you go up to where their houses are, it drops right off into Phillips's mushrooms.
The old APA plant.
Yeah. And they actually had, as I recall, they had to get an easement or what did they have to get? For the water, because there had to be an agreement between Phillips's and, what was their name? I can't remember. But it doesn't matter. They had to make an agreement with them so that they could get, and that's, because of those issues, we revisited that area and said special ag, or AI in the language of the comp plan.
Just before we close, I just want to make a comment. I think of speaking for my colleagues on the commission. I want to thank the public for the input and for your participation, for your questions. The information, as we've been saying repeatedly, the information is being recorded. We will be using that information in our deliberations. So, thank you.
One last question. So we can come to your Tuesday, second Tuesday meeting?
Please.
Right, and...
Yeah.
And here.
Please come.
Here? Okay.
No refreshments.
I appreciate your help and everything, but I think what he was getting to, and I don't know your name, is that the appearance or seeming of a conflict of interest if your own land is rezoned. And I think that's some of the questions we're trying to get at. And do you vote if your land is getting rezoned ever, or you have to excuse yourself from that? I mean, that just seems like, that I think was some of the questions seem to be basing the fact on you being on this committee and it's affecting your land. And how does that work in this committee if your land is to be rezoned? Yeah, are you
That's a good
recusing,
question.
are you recusing yourself? I mean, it seems to me that would be the way we need to do it.
Nothing.
Conflict of interest.
There's a history on the planning commission of people recusing themselves when their own land is rezoned. Chris Alonso, I guess Chris is gone. That's an example of what happened. Chris put his mushroom facility over across the street.
Or we had another example, Matt Szabo, who isn't here this evening, lives on Newt's Family Lane, and when the development on the other side of McFarland Road, he recused himself. And yes, that is the right and proper thing to do. In terms of all of this, as we've said several times, since 1985, this has been zoned R4, and from the 92, the 2004, and the plan we're working on now, the block that is under discussion, the HDR, has been the same. So nothing is being changed. If something was up in that area, if something involved a property that any one of us was close to and had a strong opinion, absolutely the right and moral thing to do is to recuse yourself from discussions.
I guess it just, in my mind, goes back to that chapter 8, just contradicts the zoning that you're saying it is. The HDR in that book describes way denser housing than R4. And that's...
It's time for us to revisit that.
We're going to look at it.
Okay, let me help you out so there's no one more question. This building automatically alarms, and I got to get it packed up. You can come back, believe me, you can come back. Am I right?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yes. Thank you. We didn't get a motion to adjourn.